Okay, I'm going to tell you something that is probably going to get me into a lot of trouble, but I think it has a point to it. I'm going to tell you two statements. Now, when I tell you the first statement, you're going to think this about me, and it's going to be very negative. You're going to think rather awful things about me when I tell you the first statement. But then when I tell you the second statement, you're going to think this, almost the complete opposite. And in point of fact, there's a reason to it. Okay, so I'll tell you the first statement. Now, as you know, I'm a 49-year-old man. I'm married, I have a couple of kids. Now, here's the first statement. I once slept with a 14-year-old girl. She was 14, perhaps a little older, but not 15. She was definitely 14 when I slept with her. And yeah, that's the statement. Now, at this point in time, you hear that statement and you're thinking to yourself, what the fuck did he just say? He's basically confessing to being a pedophile. I mean, what the hell's the matter with the guy? You know, he's this sicko pervert nutbag, whatever. You know, you're thinking to yourself, well, first of all, if you're still watching, because I'm guessing that some of you will have just shut me off right after that statement and just said, oh my God, he's a pervert, he's a disgusting pig, and I'm gonna call the cops. I think some of you are probably calling the cops right now after you shut off the channel, which is why you're going to miss the second statement, and which is, of course, the reason that the police are not going to arrest me and drag me off to prison. The second statement. I was 13 years old at the time. In point of fact, it was my 13th birthday when it happened. This was back in 1981. That was, holy cow, I can't quite believe it. That was 36 years ago, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, this 14-year-old girl, she was a classmate of mine in I guess the 8th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. Her name was Elizabeth, and she ran by a nickname, but that's not important. You know, she banged me. You know, and she was 14-year-old. She was a bad girl. You know, she was into drugs, booze. I was a dweeb. You know, I was a complete dweeb, and you know, I was one of those like D&D playing dweebs who, you know, just had nothing better to do on a Saturday night than be the dungeon master for my little group of dweebs where we hung out and rolled, you know, 20-sided dice all the time, and you know, that kind of loser kid, you know. You know, we all go through a period of being complete losers. But my point is, she, for some reason, took pity on me and banged me silly, you know, and, you know, what did I do? Of course, like fucking idiot that I was, because I was 13, I went and told all my little D&D friends, and all the D&D friends, you know, went and told all their friends, and it got back to her, and she threw a hissy fit at me in the hallway of school and just like said that she hated my guts, blah, blah, blah. And you know, that was the end of that gravy train, you know, which was a pity, you know. I mean, it was, you know, I would have liked seconds, as it were. Now, this story has more than just a prurient interest to it. And there's a reason that I'm telling it. You see, the story depends on two statements. Now, the first automatically makes you think that I was some sort of pervert who slept with a 14-year-old girl as a grown man. Of course, the second statement, you know, clues you into the reality of the situation. Yeah, I was in middle school, and you know, it was one of those things that happen to kids because kids are kids, and you know, what are you going to do about it? And of course, I wasn't a pedophile. On the contrary, she was older than me at the time, you know, and you know, that's that. It's just a story, but it requires context. You hear the one statement, you think one thing. You hear the second statement, and you think something completely different. And that's the point of the MSM. You see, the problem with the MSM is that it is relentlessly pushing a narrative and not giving complete information about what it is saying. Now, there's a lot of talk about this famous mainstream media narrative. Let's focus a little bit on that term narrative, okay? Now, everybody knows where this came from, as a matter of fact. I mean, not the word narrative, of course, but narrative in relation to the news media. It came from the editorial board of the New York Times. Back in the 1950s, 60s, when the New York Times realized that it was the paper of record in the United States, the editors started to self-consciously start to try to guide what the paper was about. You see, in most newspapers, what would happen is the reporters would come to the editor and say, this is what's going on, in town. There's everybody's interested in this, people are interested in that. It was more responsive to the people living in the city, is what I'm trying to say. And the news from the people would filter to the journalists, and which in turn would filter up to the editors. And the editors in turn would see all the things that were of interest to the different reporters. And because, of course, a newspaper has a limited amount of space, the editor would assign priority in terms of stories. Okay, this story about the dog getting, the cat getting caught up in the tree is trivial, but this other story about corruption maybe in the mayor's office, that's more important, so let's devote more time to that, and that sort of thing. But see, what happened at the New York Times, and this began to spread throughout the rest of the mainstream media as the mainstream media became smaller and smaller, as it began to consolidate into fewer and fewer media companies. What happened was, the editors started dictating that which they considered important. It started with the New York Times. The New York Times, famously, the editor-in-chief would come in and say, we dictate what the United States will read tomorrow, so we have a responsibility. And see, that's all good and fine to say that you have a responsibility, but you have the responsibility to tell the truth, the complete truth, not just some of the truth. Now, the two statements I gave you, the one I slept with a 14-year-old girl, I was 13 at the time. Now, the first statement, you put that up, you destroy somebody's life. You put up the second one that gives context, and it becomes just this semi-amusing anecdote of something that happened 36 years ago. But see, what the mainstream media is doing is that it is pushing a particular narrative. And since what happens is most of the people in the press, for various very well understood reasons, tend to be left-leaning. They tend to slant the news towards the left. Now, by slanting the news towards the left, they are ignoring problems that appeal to or are affecting right-wing viewers, right-wing readers. They are not looking at those problems. And they start to create a fissure in the democracy. Now, this matters because we don't want a fissure in the democracy. We want a cohesive democracy where there's infighting, where there are differences of opinion, where there is a diversity of viewpoint. Because see, all this, why do we have racial diversity? Because we want different points of view. But the problem with the mainstream media narrative is there is no different viewpoint. There's only the viewpoint of the mainstream media. What they consider, what they have come to the consensus is worth talking about. Now, this becomes a very, very serious problem because you start ignoring other problems. You start ignoring the second statement. You only focus on the first statement. Yeah? You don't give context to what's going on. And you start giving people, the readers, a slanted view of reality. And so, of course, what's happening now is that a lot of people are wising up to the fact that the mainstream media is presenting slanted news. It's not fake news, it's slanted. The mainstream media is not doing its job. It's not listening to the reporters. It's telling the reporters what to report. Now, the reason the mainstream media has become out and out evil in my conception of things, is that it is holding on to this narrative tighter and tighter. It is unwilling to entertain opposing points of view. It cannot conceive that there are justifiable reasons to be against what the newspaper stands for, to be against what the editors and reporters of the newspapers and media companies believe in. They think it's evil, because that's what happened to the left. The left has reached a point where it believes that anybody who is opposed to them is evil. He's a Nazi, he's a bigot, he's a misogynist, he's this, that, the other, you know. Now, of course, this Manichaean view of reality serves no other purpose than to divide the democracy. And see, the enemies of a democracy, and there are enemies, Islam being the #1 enemy of our democracies, the Western democracies. Well, this divide and conquer, you know, people say it for a reason. You know, it's a cliche. Cliches are cliches for very good reasons, because they are often is not true. Yeah? The mainstream media is helping to divide the country, because it is silencing, or trying to silence, those with opposing points of view, those with views that go against the mainstream narrative. That's why the mainstream narrative is evil, and that's why we have to fight it every step of the way. Now, sometimes I think to myself that it's sort of like a waste of time to go after every little article that's going on in the mainstream media, and I see a lot of commenters do that. They go after, you know, this article, that article, where the mainstream media is selling a bunch of bullshit. But at the same time, I realize that, see, that kind of fight is necessary, and it's a useful thing, because we have to stop the mainstream media. And so what we have to do is start telling the mainstream media that it's not that they are fake news. They are slanted news. And we have to tell them, show them, expose them to different points of view. Different points of view, so they look at the second statement. See, the first statement gives you a slanted view of reality. The second statement gives you the context. And we need the mainstream media to start doing that. Now, the mainstream media is losing viewers, losing readership, you know, by the tens of thousands every day. Now, a lot of people think that they're going to be going out of business. Yeah, maybe, sure. But the government is making every effort, the governments of all the Western democracies are making every effort to buoy the mainstream media, because the mainstream media has become their megaphone. Now, we all can think of it, we have a choice basically. We can have the mainstream media reform and start detaching itself from the government and the corporations and start reporting actual news, or let it sink. Let it sink under its own weight. Let it sink for its own sins of being so slanted. Now, those are the two options. Myself, I think it would be good to try to salvage them. Other people think that it would be better to let them sink. I think a Styx Hexenhammer 666 is always of the opinion to let them sink. I'm not so sure. I think the mainstream media is very useful when you want news, important news, to be quickly diffused throughout the society, but it's a difference of opinion. It doesn't matter. The thing that has to be done anyway is to halt the mainstream narrative. Halt the mainstream narrative. Make sure that they are reporting the actual news, the complete news, and that they include that second statement. That they always include that second statement, and not at the end of the article, in the top paragraph. In the top paragraph. The mainstream media has an important role in a democracy. It can be a source of unity. In the 1930s and 40s and 50s, it was that source of unity. In the 60s and in the 60s and the 70s, I remember watching Walter Cronkite, you know, every evening during the 70s. Walter Cronkite, Uncle Walt, he was the voice of America practically. And everybody listened to him, and everybody respected him. He gave us all the common narrative, but a narrative that encompassed everybody. Not just some people, not just the media elites, not just the coastal elites, the whole country. Now, we have to somehow get back to that period. Okay, so that's all for today. Before I sign off, I'd ask you please to subscribe. It's becoming increasingly clear that my channel is being throttled. And I would very much appreciate if you would not only subscribe to my channel, but also tell other people that you know, both online and offline, about my channel. And if you think my content is any good, please recommend my channel. Thank you very much.